Okay, welcome to our Chanukah not Haftorah shir. And I'm going to share the source sheet on the screen. I think it did also go out in the email this morning. Just looking for the right button. Here we go. Oops. And hello, Tamar and Jerry. I'm glad you're here. I'm battling my computer, so you're right on time. Here we go. Okay. So I was learning a little bit for Hanukkah, trying to figure out what I wanted to teach, and I came across an interesting grouping. I don't know if anyone here plays the New York Times word games, but I just discovered when I was home for Thanksgiving, my family was telling me about the one called Connections, which is 16 different words, and you have to group them into 4 groupings. And they're hard. They're not like the obvious use of the word, whatever the word is. And so here in the Gemara and Bava Kama, if you're doing Daf Yomi, it will come up, I think, within a month. Rav Kahana says, hello, Tamar and Jerry. So nice to see you guys. Welcome. Rav Kahana says, Daresh Rav Natan bar Minyome Mishme Dravi Tanchum. Right. So in this very first source, Rav Kahana quotes ultimately Rabbi Tanchum, who says, Ner Chanukah shehenicha lamala me'esrim ama psula ke suka uke mavoy. So one of the things that is interesting to me here is this sort of funny grouping of objects. What does a sukkah, a alleyway like the edge of an eruv, and a ner Chanukah, a menorah, have in common? So here, what Rabbi Tanchum says is that none of those things can be built higher than 20 amot, which is about 32 feet high. So that's an interesting grouping of things. What about them, right? What about them makes them need to be short or perhaps at eyes level is what I would say. So Rashi here in Bava Kama is quick to point out that lamala me'esri mama lo chazula inshe, that people won't see it, right? And if ner Chanukah v'lo mefarsem nisa v'anan lefirsume nisa ba'inan, right? That the whole point of the Chanukah, the Chanukah menorah, is to be publicizing the miracle of Chanukah. And if it's too high in the air, you won't publicize it. Yes, Tamar.
I have a question. There are times, like many people feel the present time is one of those times when one doesn't feel safe. Put the Chanukah in the open window. Is there any comment about that type of situation?
Yes, definitely. In fact, the Gemara does in Masechet Shabbat, like where more of the details of Hanukkah are, talks extensively about lots of different cases where you might need to be not in the window or not mefursam hanes, right? Not publicizing the miracle. And one of them is, in fact, exactly what you're saying, right? If someone feels that it's dangerous to them, it would draw unwanted publication of the miracle. They say that you can light inside. And if you're going to light away from the window, it's good if someone else comes over. So even if it's like your partner or your child or a friend that already knows about the miracle, right? It's like a little bit funny to call that publicizing the miracle, that person can observe the Chanukah from the inside, and that's a perfectly fine way to do it at that time. Other cases are like a really tall apartment building where putting it in the window on that 15th floor is certainly above 20 feet, right? 32 feet, and also very hard to see. And so interestingly, if you live in a place with lots of apartment buildings, there's like maybe an idea that your 15th floor is like line 0 for anyone else on the 15th floor. And so anyone looking across the street from their apartment building will see it. But also the same sort of internal publication applies. Like anyone who's in your house would be able to see it. And the other thing I would say is I have seen, I don't know if it's happening, it's certainly not happening in Ann Arbor. There seems to be some kind of campaign asking our non-Jewish friends and allies to put Chanukiot in their own windows, so that it was like a little bit less calling yourself out. I don't know if they just put themselves at risk of having their property damaged, or they actually sort of, spread out that risk and make it less. But yes, it's a very real worry today. And certainly you could put it not in your window as a result of that.
It's like King of Denmark wearing a yellow star.
Yeah, I think that was the idea, exactly. If nothing else, it certainly feels like a show of solidarity, which is nice. I think it's nice to feel the support of our non-Jewish neighbors at this time. But again, I don't know that anyone is doing it, but I thought it was a very lovely campaign idea. So Rashi is pointing out that if we're trying to publicize the miracle, right, even in our own home, let's say you had a home with like an atrium, like a very fancy, tall spiral staircase, right? You wouldn't want to put your Chanukah at 32 feet above. And I think the atrium is like a nice image here, because if you look up in the atrium, you might see like knickknacks or plants or pictures that people put in their windows on the first and second and third floor. But it's very unlikely that you'll be able to see that level of detail, by the time you get to the fourth floor. So I think it's a good way of thinking about the miracle, no matter where it is, whether it's for people inside or outside. You want it to be at a height where people can easily see it without having to, arc their neck too much. So that makes sense for Hanukkah, but it doesn't really make sense for Sukkah or for Eruv, right? In the same way. So I want to bring the piece about Sukkah because I think that there is a sort of similarity here, and then we'll sort of think about what else is similar about Sukkot to Hanukkah. So Sukkah, there are a few different choice answers, and the one that I think is most like Hanukkah is Rabba's idea. And he brings the pasuk to Amar Kra, L'man yedu dorotechem ki basukot hoshati et bnei Yisrael. He says, well, why are we supposed to sit in the sukkah at all? It's to remember that God brought us out of Egypt in a great show of miracle and strength and gave us Sukkot to live in the desert. And that the point of the sukkah is to be able to see the schach, right? And if you put the schach up too high, then you might forget you're sitting in a sukkah. You might think you're sitting in a pergola or in a lovely outdoor, shaded area. But that the sort of the focus of the sukkah is the schach, and if it's too high up in the air, right, then you might not see it. And Rashi reminds us here that the schach serves as the ananei hakavod, the hekif ananei hakavod, is what that verse refers to. And so I think that both Hanukkah and Sukkot are telling us that if we put the ritual object too far up in the air, we'll forget about the miracle. Whether it's to publicize the miracle or be aware of the miracle, these are both holidays that celebrate that miraculous show of God protecting us, whether it's in the desert after leaving Egypt or in the time of the Maccabees in Israel. And so I think the theme, or sort of and I think Eruv, by the way, fits into this theme in the way that I would say that maybe there are both holidays where we cultivate our awareness. Right, it's not enough to sort of go through the movements of lighting the candles or shaking your lulav and etrog or eating in the sukkah. It's about really being like focused and aware of your environment and being able to appreciate the miracles that have come. So I think that the Gemara thinks that the where does the Eruv fit in? Well, it's sort of the same idea. On Shabbat, you have to cultivate a physical awareness of where you are. Are you in the public space or the private space? And if the Eruv is up too high, you might inadvertently leave the Eruv without recognizing it. Right, when you think about actual doorposts, as opposed to like thin telephone wires that are all over the city, I think it would be noticeable if you had left the Eruv. And if it was too high, you might not notice, and you might carry involuntarily. So I think all three of them, right? If we were playing connections, and we looked at these three things, the Sukkah, the Mavui, and the Ner Hanukkah, we would say things that have to be in a place where we can really pay attention to them. So that's step one. Any thoughts, ideas? Okay, so once I read this first Gemara in Bava Kama, I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. There are actually lots of similarities, I think, between Chanukah and Sukkot. Any others come to mind? Anyone want to guess some before we look at some of the sources? Okay, I'll share them. Maybe as we go, you'll think of new ones. So here are a few interesting similarities. My favorite, the first one, which is why I put it first, is this concept of mahadrin. Right, the Tanu Rabbanan mitzvah Chanukah ner ish uveto. Right, so the basic level of Hanukkah, which I would say most people do not practice today, is to have one person light one candle every night. So over the course of Hanukkah, you would have 16 candles, one shamash, one candle each night. The mahadrin, more like a better level, ner l'chol echad ve'echad. So if you have two people in your house, then you would use 32 candles, right? I think that's right, right? 16 per person for each night. The mahadrin, min ha-mahadrin, the best level, Beit Shammai omrim, right? This is the, once we agree that we're going to light the full 54 or 64, however many candles it is, one per night, one for the first night, two for the second night. There's a debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about whether the candles will go up, right, 1 to 8, or down 8 to 1. And so Beit Shammai, who we don't follow, right, says Yom Rishon Madlik Shmona, you light 8 the first day, Mikan ve'elech pochet v'holech, one less each day. Beit Hillel, the way that we do follow Yom Rishon Madlik Echat, on the first day you light 1, Mikan ve'elech mosif ve'elech, and then you add to them, right? So we follow Beit Hillel, but Beit Shammai's argument is recorded, and what is interesting about it is it follows the logic of Sukkot. So we're going to jump here. V'chad Amar, and one said, Ta'ama de Beit Shammai keneged parei hachag. This is corresponds to the number of bulls that are offered as korbanot on the festival of Sukkot. V'tama de Beit Hillel d'ma'alim b'kodesh ve'ein moridin. And the principle that belongs to Beit Hillel is that we go up in sanctity, we don't go down. So ultimately, that's the argument that we hold. But Beit Shammai sees a connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah, in that, in his vision, you would start with the greatest number of sacrifice or light, and you would correspondingly, you would go down. So from 13 to 7 over the course of Sukkot, and from 8 to 1 over Hanukkah. Does that make sense? So, right, so like Shammai already sees that connection. This was actually not my favorite source, but it does mention this Mahadrian concept, which we're going to come back to in a few minutes. And then this book of Maccabees source is, maybe this is my favorite. They're all my favorite. I love all of the Torah that we learned together. In the book of Maccabees is an interesting thing because it's apocryphal, right? It doesn't fall into the canon of the Tanakh. It makes Hanukkah the only holiday where we don't come together to do some ritual as a community, which is interesting, right? On Purim, we read Megillat Esther together. On every other Chag, we read Torah. We have like a special, davening. All of those things sort of come together. On Hanukkah, the main sort of element is lighting candles in your own home with your own people. And so we don't read the book of Maccabees, but the book of Maccabees records a lot of the history of that time. And so here in chapter 10, very close to the end, right after all the wars have been fought and won, the battles and the war has been won, it tells us V'chagu chag laHashem shmonat yamim, that they celebrate for 8 days, and it's not yet called Hanukkah, right? This is the first occurrence of it after the victory. And it says here, it spells it out explicitly, Ki Yamei Chag HaSukkot, right? That was the one I thought maybe people would get, is that it's hard in America because Pesach ends up being 8 days here too, but 8 days of Sukkot, right? Chag Shmini Chag HaAtzeret Hazeh, the 8th day of Sukkot is this extra special day of Shmini Atzeret. And so similarly, they model Chanukah after Sukkot. They choose to do 8 days. And they remembered the previous days when they celebrated the festival of Sukkot in the mountains and in the caves. So they weren't able to celebrate at the Beit Hamikdash. They weren't able to bring korbanot on Sukkot, right? They were out in the field. They were out at war. And so there's this idea that they were having a second Sukkot. And that idea of like the second chance at Sukkot kind of took my breath away this year. I felt very emotional when I read that because I thought like, gosh, like if there was ever a year where we could use a second Sukkot, I think this is the one. We probably all know someone who might have actually gone called back to their army base or up to Miluim on Shmini Atzeret, on Simchat Torah in Israel. But I think that all of us in some ways felt like we were, I think even just the words that they use here are so telling that to be out in the desolation in the wilderness, like wild beasts, right? To be in the mountains and caves, like even if we were physically, our bodies were in shul, to me, I very much felt this feeling that the end of Sukkot was sort of taken away. It was not, we couldn't celebrate it to its fullest, even though I think we did an admirable job in Skokie Valley trying to find that balance. And so I think that more than any other year of my life, I felt like, wow, I get it, what the Maccabees were doing, right? They felt like they missed Sukkot. This is the next time, right? We know now is exactly 64 days or whatever it is between Sukkot and Hanukkah. And so they said, well, let's have a second try. And so what did they do? They took their lulav, right? The willows and the branches of the palm trees. V'yishiru, and they sang a song of praise. Shir Shavach B'Hoda'ah LaHashem, right? Halal, Asher Natan La. And so this idea of the Maccabees in December, Ki'ilu and Kislev, waving their lulav and etrog and singing Hallel as though they were celebrating Sukkot, I think is a beautiful idea. I don't know. It was really resonant for me. I'm curious how other people feel about it.
Yeah, I had one thought as you were speaking. All of a sudden, it dawned on me. Sukkot this year coincided with the beginning of a war, invaders, foreign enemies, and now it's culminating with Hanukkah, which is a military triumph of the Jews. And we see the news report that the Hamas is surrendering, is breaking down, and we seem to be winning this war in Gaza. So I think it's a nice coronation for starting Sukkot now with the Chanukah, a victory for Chanukah.
Yeah, totally. And I think, right, I saw someone say, and I think that actually Judy Klitzner will speak about this on Thursday, it's like, what does it mean, Bisman Hazeh? Right? Every year we say, oh, it's like we should experience it in this year. But Nelson, I think like what you're saying is true, right? Like it is Bisman Hazeh. Right now it feels very much alive. And I think that the time of Hanukkah historically was a time that was very contentious in sort of real life. I think one of the reasons we don't read the book of Maccabees is it doesn't focus on the miracle of the oil, which is what the rabbis sort of concocted as this nice story to share about Nes Hanukkah, as opposed to the military victory, which was tricky, as military victories are, right? And so I think the fact that there are also sort of I don't know the right word, maybe alarming stories that come out of Israel right now about phosphorus gas or the way we treat Gazan men who are being interrogated or whatever the thing is and whatever our politics are, they are all welcome to be shared here. I think that both are probably true, right? Both that we want to be able to sing and sort of celebrate publicly and really be grateful, and also to recognize that like the book of Maccabees is complicated and life now might be complicated too, but that we hope that we are headed in that direction of being able to feel safe and secure and in our own borders for sure. And the Sfat Emet, he connects Hanukkah in two ways. Oh, I saved the best for last. Although this is pretty good, and the title. The Sfat Emet talks about how he mentions the Mishnah, which I thought about bringing, but it's kind of a technicality about Bikurim. It's kind of like taxes, right? Like I think taxes are officially due on April 1st, right? But you can get like an extension, right? I think that's right. I'm displaying my lack of knowledge. I'm looking at Debbie, hoping she'll save me if I say something wrong. I said it right. So Bikurim are due on Sukkot, but you could get an extension until Hanukkah, basically, I think is what the Mishnah is saying. And so the Sfat Emet is saying, well, why is that, right? What's the connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah? Is it just a date that's well known on the calendar, or is there another reason? And he says, Valir it's meant to hint, Kinim Shach Ha'arat HaChag Ad Chanukah, that the light of Sukkot remains with us until Hanukkah. I thought that was such a beautiful idea, right? Like as we head, Sukkot we leave the long light days of summer at that time in the year, and we head towards our darkest days. Whether they're spiritually our darkest days as they might be now, or they're just physically our darkest days when we need light, it's like the light of Sukkot is like, it dims, but it doesn't go out until we light our own Chanukiot, until we bring our own new light into the world. And I thought, like, what a beautiful bridge of light from Sukkot, and like sometimes when we sit in our Sukkot, it's raining and cold, but sometimes you see the sun sort of filter through the schach, and it's so beautiful. And to think that that light is staying with us, I thought was very beautiful. Yeah, Tamar, please.
Speaking of lights, I personally am very happy that Bet Shammai's way was not adopted, because when you think of his method, you start with a burst of light and then gradually diminishes, and there's a feeling of loss. I would feel loss as the light diminished day by day. Whereas Hillel's way, the opposite. You start with a small light, it grows, you look forward to the growing light, and you end with this crescendo.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful, right? And it makes it such a nice symmetry. Like Sukkot starts at the crescendo and then it dwindles sort of to now. And then we catch that like last little bit of light and we build it back up. I think I agree. Psychologically, I think it's much more beautiful to watch the light grow over time, and to think about all the ways that we help the light grow, right? The Sfat Emet talks about how we are the Neirot Chanukah, our mitzvot, our Neirot Chanukah, that we bring not just the physical light of the candles, but that the more we do in the world. And that's like, all of those beautiful stories that come out of Israel right now about people koshering their restaurants to bring meals to soldiers, and people in New York paying for any ticket for any chayal going back to Israel. Like, I think we have brought a lot of light, even in dark times, in that way. And so I want to end with my favorite source about the Mahadran. I think this idea that we have Mahadran both on Hanukkah and on Sukkot is really interesting. That the idea that we can enhance our holiday in a way that it's just not spoken about in exactly the same way, right? Like, obviously, there are ways we can be Mahadran on Pesach or on Shavuot, but it really is only spoken about in the Torah for Sukkot, right? Pre-Eitz Hadar. And here on Chanukah, we talk about in the Gemara this idea that we all do the Mahadrin min HaMahadrin. And I think thinking about like enhancement at this time in the calendar year is interesting, right? Because it is a time where like maybe you feel like you need a little extra, and then also he mentions that this idea that like the last day is sort of like a catch-all for the holiday, right? Shmini Atzeret is the day that includes, right, Kolel Kol Hayamim. It includes all of the days of the Chag, Ma'asef Kol Yemei HaChag. And on Hanukkah, we have this idea of Zot Hanukkah, right? Zos Hanukkah, the 8th day of Hanukkah, that in some way is supposed to encapsulate. And I think, Tamar, that like really goes to your point, right? Like the bonfire that holds all the days that had been leading up to it. as that last day. And I thought that the way that the Sfat Emet frames it is so beautiful, right? Shehu yom ha'acharon kashe aleinu fridot hayamim tovim. Right? It's hard for us to say goodbye. I think often on Shmini Atzeret we talk about how it's hard for God to say goodbye, and so God asks for this last day. But I think on Sukkot and on Hanukkah, right, you've really gotten into it. Like you were saying, Nelson, like your grandkids are already sad that it's almost over, right? And that it becomes hard to say goodbye. And so that 8th day like holds all of that joy, so that we can hold on just a little while longer. And that light, that like holy light of Sukkot that comes with us is woken up by the candles of our menorah. Like it gives it like an extension, a jetpack into the future. And so I think at this time where we feel like we're so close to being like the Maccabees, where we can celebrate our Sukkot Sheni, as it were, is also a dark time. And so knowing that we can borrow that last little bit of the Sukkot light, and we can like awaken the light with our own, by bringing our own light through mitzvot and lighting candles, hopefully will give us that like jetpack to get through what is hopefully not many more months of uncertainty and danger and feeling the loss that war brings us. So I hope that we can bring the light of Sukkot into our Chanukah, and then take that sort of bonfire of Zos Chanukah and bring it into the year, and keep it going so that we can emerge victorious, to wave our lulav and sing Hallel in a full voice.
Amen.
Well, I was wondering before you started how you're going to pull this trick of bringing Sukkot to Hanukkah. Just couldn't get it, but Yasher Koach, you did a great job.
I had some good help in the Sfat Emet. I thought it was really beautiful. It was something I had never heard before. I'm gonna stop the recording.